Hello, and thanks for joining us for this how to play video where we'll cover the Smugglers of Kaimas. Now, first of all, we'll look at setup. So here you can see a 4-player setup where on each player board you will set up the player board with 4 of the 5 inspect cargo markers. Each of the tracks have a value up to the level shown in black, as you can see here. So you'll have 3 sabotage markers and 2 reserve pipeline project markers for each player. The 5th marker can just sit to one side. Then you'll set up the middle of the table. So here, for example, if you look at the project roster, we've got the pipeline projects. There's a series of projects available for completion. You'll shuffle these decks and place them face up. So the level 1 projects, level 2 and level 3. And then you'll have face up the level 1, level 2, level 3 for the active projects. And then in here, you'll shuffle the impact cards and they'll remain face down. So 12 cards in the pile there. Now, the Separatist Stores mat provides you with the resources that are in the stores. These are typically assigned 2 per player, so you'll take the shuffled deck and deal out these resources for the number of players. So this would be 8 resources in these decks for a 4-player game. You've got the dice, you've got a little home for it here, and you've got the checkpoint control marker that indicates the number of positions that are open on the checkpoint. You'll also take the belt cards and lay them on the belts like this, 1 per player. And then there's a pile of empty cargo cards that sit here in this slot. Now, for the gameplay, you basically will deal out 5 resources per player. So you can shuffle these decks and then per player draw 5 resources into your inventory. And we'll just place these over here like so that we can see them. And these would be private in your hand so that other players couldn't see them, but we'll just flip them over for these purposes. Now, from this point, we'll go through the gameplay, having concluded the setup. On here, players are aiming to race to get resources from their inventory, so these are the resources that are typically in their hand, through into their stockpile. And this will enable you to complete these projects by paying the relevant resources and enable you to gain the number of influence that you'll need to secure victory. Now, the number of influence needed for victory varies by player count. So for a 2-player game, it's 10 influence. For a 3-player game, it's 8. And for a 4-player game, it is 7. Now, just to review some of the orders that you can make in the game, you can basically collect resources. So this is where you can raid GCC shipments, and this is based on the resource table. So in the middle position here, when we roll a dice, the relevant dice roll will relate to these number of resources being drawn from this pile face down. As shipments pass through the checkpoint, they are monitored, and if an inspection passes, as the manifest matches its cargo of 1 resource per shipment, then the marker would move down and the resource yield would vary. If the inspection or the CCTV that's just monitoring all shipments passing through identifies that the cargo doesn't match the manifest, i.e. it has more than 1 resource in it, then it moves in this direction for each time that it is observed to not match the manifest. And in this scenario, you would see that the resource radial for collecting resources is based on the dice roll will produce these values, again, all face down from this deck. So as shipments pass through the checkpoint, this will vary quite dynamically, and you'll have to adapt your strategy as to whether you'll find that you'll have to draw 2 of a different resource from separatist stores, or randomly obtain resources as per the tables. The next order that you can do is you can approach cave, and this is where you can place 2 or 3 of the same resource type at the cave entrance, and this would be face down. So on here you can basically add these cards, turn them over face down so that your opponents can't see what you're pushing through. And then what you'll see here is that at the start of each turn, your resources will move up at the checkpoint and then move up at the cave. And these will eventually arrive in the stockpile. When you approach the checkpoint, you have the ability to draw 2 empty cargo containers into your hand, and then you can place a resource face up and 2 containers face down. So if you want to guarantee the resource comes through, then placing 1 on top and these 2 would go face down like so. That would then guarantee that the shipment would pass the inspection, and it moves up at the start of each turn and eventually will come through into your stockpile. However, the number of turns that it might take you might be longer than you might be willing to want to take. So you might be in a position where you want to smuggle a resource through, and this is where you would take one of these cards, put 1 resource in face down so none of the players could see what it was, and then again 1 resource face up. And this would then come into your inventory as you've been managing these cards, and other players wouldn't be able to determine what resources were in here as you're attempting to smuggle through more than the allowed 1 resource per shipment. Now the key thing here is that when you are truthful and this moves down, you'll place a belt card onto these tracks per player, and you'll then see that it's only going to take 1 turn for shipments to pass through the conveyor belt. So successive truthful declarations as they come through will then, again, that could perform a raid against you and it would come back round. And then the belt cards are removed like so. So if there was a shipment that came through at this stage and it didn't match the manifest, then you would strip the belt of these cards and it would stay that way until the shipment was declared truthful, and then these belt cards would come back like so. You can also sabotage your rivals, so you can roll a dice, and a roll of a 5 or 6 will allow you to take a resource from an opponent's stockpile and add it to your own. In the instance where you are going for a project and you're concerned that somebody else may take it, so as we know we've got 3 water coming through here, you can take a turn, you can reserve that pipeline project like so, and you can put a marker on it to indicate to other players that only you are now eligible to complete this project. You can also complete the project whereby you pay the resources. So you'll pay, in this instance, 4 food from your stockpile, 3 water from your stockpile, and you'll then gain the influence. You then go to the mat. You can see if you were to complete a project, then there would be no projects here, and you can bring this down from the relevant slot to fill the one that was completed. If you're completing a pipeline project, you simply remove the marker from it, and this then counts as the valid number of completed influence points. The next thing to do in sequence after completing a project is to then gain the reward. You then get the relevant reward as listed on the project, and you are then in a scenario where after you've performed the collection of the reward, you then roll a dice and you determine the project impact. A draw of 1 and 2 enables you to draw 3 resources from the raid deck and add them to Separatist stores. A 3 or a 4 enables all players to draw 1 resource from Separatist stores and add them to their inventory. A roll of 5 or 6 activates an impact card, and this will have an impact for all players on a number of different elements within the game. So this means that all future projects, while this card is in play, require 1 less food to complete. So those are the main actions that you can take, and within here we then have a 7th action, which is the anytime action, where you can place a marker on an opponent's cargo. If the resources that you find within the shipment don't match the manifest, so if it's just 1 resource, then you've wasted your marker. But if you find that your opponent, for example, has been untruthful in what they've declared, so the inspection room here, as you can see, then the empty cargo container goes back, and it goes back from the player's inventory at this point as well. And in this instance where they've been caught smuggling, these resources go to the discard. So using your inspect cargo markers on other players is a way to fish out those players who are attempting to smuggle. The main thing to be aware of is that you only have a few markers, and you'll probably need to perform many more shipments through the checkpoint. So you have to be quite careful with how many markers you use. Once you use a marker, it's discarded, and there is a mechanism to get more, and that is if the checkpoint control sees that more people are smuggling resources through, as we've just seen there, we see the marker move. And then if another player were to also smuggle resources through, whether they've just gone through and nobody checked, or whether they've gone through and been checked, the marker would come to this position, and all players gain 1 inspect cargo marker. And then this comes back around into the central location. In the scenario where all players had been honest repeatedly, then this would come around this way, and then we perform the GCC response here if there is another honest shipment gone through the checkpoint. This is where you roll the dice. If a 1 or 2 is rolled, all players choose a resource and lose that from their stockpile. A 3 and a 4, all players will lose a resource from their inventory, and a 5 and a 6, you lose 1 resource of each type from Separatist stores, and it would then come back around to the midpoint. In Smugglers, as you are smuggling more resources through the checkpoint, there is a minimum that you might have to pass, and as you start providing more shipments through, 1 player might then be eligible for the Master Smuggler, and this is worth 3 influence to the player who holds it. However, if a player then smuggles more resources through and then maybe another resource through again, then they would then take those 3 points and add it to their collection. And in a 4-player game with 7 as the pass mark, then that operation of smuggling might score you 9 and therefore immediately win the game. So this has been how to play Smugglers of Kaimas. We hope you enjoy the game and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.